What specific behaviors actually break through an avoidance defenses instead of reinforcing them? Avoidants have specific psychological triggers that lower their defenses, but these triggers work opposite to what most people try. The behaviors that feel natural, pursuing, reassuring, explaining feelings, activate their withdrawal reflex. What actually breaks through operates on completely different principles. In this video, you'll learn the 10 psychological triggers that naturally lower an avoidance defenses and create genuine attraction. Certain behaviors trigger attraction in avoidance, while others trigger retreat. Pursuing them activates withdrawal. Expressing need creates distance. But showing complete self-sufficiency sparks curiosity. Demonstrating indifference generates interest. Avoidants feel attracted to behaviors most people never try. Emotional independence draws them in. Unshakable calm during their withdrawal makes them curious. Having a full life without them creates appeal. These psychological turn-ons work because they address what the avoidance nervous system actually responds to, eliminating the pressures that normally make them run and speaking directly to what their attachment wiring registers as safe and attractive. Understanding what actually attracts avoidance requires recognizing how their attachment system developed. Most avoidants learned early that expressing needs led to rejection or dismissal, so their nervous system adapted by equating emotional safety with independence. When someone pursues them intensely, it triggers the very survival mechanism that protected them as children, the impulse to create distance. Their brain interprets pursuit as potential engulfment, which feels psychologically dangerous even when they consciously want connection. This creates the fundamental paradox in avoidant attraction. The harder someone pursues, the more threatening it feels to their autonomy, which is the core psychological resource they learn to protect. But when pursuit stops and space appears, their nervous system recalibrates, the threat dissipates, and suddenly there's room for curiosity to emerge. This isn't manipulation or game playing, it's the natural way their attachment system functions based on decades of neural programming. The first psychological turn-on involves demonstrating complete emotional self-sufficiency. When avoidants encounter someone who appears genuinely content, whether the relationship progresses or not, it disrupts their entire defensive framework. Most people they date eventually reveal that their happiness depends on the avoidance reciprocation, which immediately triggers withdrawal. But someone who maintains their own emotional center, regardless of the avoidance behavior, presents something their nervous system has rarely encountered: a person who won't become destabilized by distance. This feels inherently safe because it removes the pressure they've been defending against their entire lives. Emotional self-sufficiency shows up in subtle ways that avoidants notice immediately. Someone who doesn't follow up after being left on read for days. Someone who makes plans with friends instead of waiting for the avoidant to decide their schedule. Someone whose mood remains stable whether they receive attention or not. These behaviors communicate something the avoidance attachment system desperately needs to see. That connection won't threaten the other person's stability, which means it won't threaten their own autonomy. The second trigger connects directly to this through authentic indifference about outcomes. This differs completely from playing hard to get or pretending not to care. Avoidants have finely tuned detection systems for inauthenticity because their childhood required them to navigate complex emotional landscapes where stated intentions rarely matched actual behavior. They can sense when someone is strategically withdrawing to provoke pursuit. But genuine indifference, where someone truly feels okay with whatever happens, creates a psychological opening because it eliminates the performance anxiety that usually accompanies their relationships. When someone demonstrates actual indifference about whether things progress, the avoidant experiences something transformative. the relationship stops feeling like an obligation they need to fulfill or escape. There's no unspoken pressure to meet expectations or maintain certain behaviors. This absence of expectation is profoundly attractive to their nervous system because expectation is exactly what their attachment style developed to avoid. Every relationship where someone needed them to be different or more available reinforced their belief that closeness equals loss of self. But someone who needs nothing specific from them allows space for genuine desire to emerge. The third psychological turn-on involves having an obviously full life that doesn't revolve around them. Avoidants are attracted to people who have rich internal worlds, demanding careers, passionate hobbies, and meaningful friendships that command significant time and energy. When someone's life appears complete without them, it triggers curiosity rather than obligation. Most people they encounter eventually make the avoidant the center of their emotional world, which creates pressure to reciprocate at levels that feel suffocating. But someone whose life remains expansive and engaging, whether the avoidant participates or not, presents a completely different proposition. This fullness of life communicates several things simultaneously. It shows the person won't become dependent, which addresses the avoidant's core fear. It demonstrates the person has their own identity separate from the relationship, which the avoidant deeply values since maintaining separate identity is their primary psychological project. It also creates natural scarcity that makes time together feel special rather than obligatory. When someone is genuinely busy pursuing their own goals and interests, the avoidant doesn't feel trapped by constant availability. Instead, they feel fortunate when that person chooses to spend time with them, which is an entirely different emotional experience than feeling responsible for someone's happiness. The fourth trigger operates through calm confidence during their withdrawal periods. When avoidants pull back, which they inevitably do, most people respond with anxiety, questioning, or attempts to restore closeness. These responses confirm the avoidant's fear that others can't handle their need for space, which reinforces withdrawal. But someone who remains completely unfazed when the avoidant disappears for days or weeks creates cognitive dissonance. The expected anxious reaction doesn't materialize, which forces the avoidant to reconsider their assumptions about what connection requires. Calm confidence during withdrawal means not sending follow-up messages, not asking what's wrong, not trying to fix or understand the distance. It means continuing life exactly as before, maintaining the same energy and contentment. When the avoidant eventually resurfaces and finds the other person unchanged, not resentful, not anxious, just continuing their life, it challenges their fundamental belief that their needs damage relationships. They've spent years experiencing how their withdrawal hurts others, which reinforced their shame about their attachment style. But someone who genuinely doesn't suffer from their absence suggests that maybe their needs aren't as destructive as they believed. The fifth psychological turn-on centers on never making their avoidance the relationship's main topic. Many people who date avoidants eventually start conversations about attachment styles, emotional availability, or the avoidance patterns. These conversations, even when well-intentioned, feel like criticism and pressure to change. The avoidant interprets them as evidence that they're not enough as they are, which triggers deeper withdrawal. But someone who never mentions these topics, who simply accepts the dynamic without commentary, provides something rare: unconditional acceptance of their current emotional capacity. This acceptance doesn't mean tolerating treatment that feels bad. It means that if the dynamic doesn't work, the person simply leaves rather than trying to change the avoidant. But while choosing to stay, they don't make the avoidant's attachment style a project to fix. This communicates profound respect for the avoidant's autonomy, which is exactly what their nervous system needs to feel safe enough to potentially lower defenses. Every conversation about their avoidance reinforces their identity as someone with a problem to solve, but someone who relates to them as they are, without pathologizing their need for space, allows them to experience the relationship without the shame that usually accompanies their attachment pattern. The sixth trigger involves matching their investment level exactly. Avoidants are highly attuned to reciprocity, even though their withdrawal patterns might suggest otherwise. When someone invests more than they do, more effort, more planning, more emotional expression, it creates immediate pressure to match that investment, which triggers withdrawal. But someone who calibrates their investment to exactly mirror the avoidance effort creates equilibrium. The avoidant texts once every few days, the other person does the same. The avoidant suggests plans once a week. The other person matches that frequency. This mirroring eliminates the pressure differential that usually builds in their relationships. Matching investment communicates that the person understands boundaries and respects pacing. It shows they're not trying to accelerate intimacy beyond what feels comfortable. For avoidants who spent their lives experiencing how their natural pace disappoints others, encountering someone who moves at their exact speed feels revolutionary. There's no sense of falling short, no guilt about not meeting expectations, no pressure to be more available than feels authentic. This allows them to experience the relationship at their own nervous system's pace, which is the only way they can genuinely open up over time. The seventh psychological turn-on operates through demonstrated competence and self-reliance. Avoidants are attracted to people who solve their own problems, manage their own emotions, and handle life's challenges independently. This connects to their core belief that needing others is dangerous. When someone regularly seeks their help, emotional support, or guidance, it activates the avoidant's fear of being depended upon. But someone who consistently demonstrates capability and resourcefulness appeals directly to their value system. They respect strength and independence because those are the qualities they've cultivated in themselves as protective mechanisms. This competence needs to be genuine rather than performed. Avoidants detect falseness quickly, so pretending to need nothing while actually feeling needy creates worse outcomes than honestly expressing needs. But people who genuinely have developed strong self-reliance through their own life experiences naturally appeal to avoidant attachment systems. When someone handles setbacks without falling apart, processes emotions independently, and makes decisions confidently, it signals they won't become the emotional dependent the avoidant fears. This creates attraction because the avoidant can imagine connection without the suffocation they associate with others' needs. The eighth trigger centers on respecting boundaries before they're stated. Avoidants often feel they have to explicitly set boundaries, which creates conflict and reinforces their belief that their needs cause problems. But someone who intuitively respects space, doesn't push for information the avoidant hasn't offered, and doesn't cross unstated lines creates a sense of ease. This person somehow understands the avoidant's limits without needing them explained or defended. For someone whose entire attachment history involved fighting for autonomy, encountering someone who naturally respects it without being asked feels magnetic. This intuitive boundary respect shows up in many small ways, not asking personal questions too quickly, not assuming access to their time or space, not pushing for relationship definitions or commitments before the avoidant offers them, not interpreting their need for alone time as rejection. These behaviors communicate that the person has strong boundaries themselves and therefore respects others' boundaries as extensions of the same principle. Avoidants feel deeply attracted to people with clear boundaries because it suggests the relationship won't become the enmeshed dynamic they've spent their lives avoiding. The ninth psychological turn-on involves showing emotion without needing them to fix it. Avoidants often struggle with others' emotional expression because it typically comes with implicit demands for comfort or problem-solving. This triggers their discomfort with emotional dependence and their fear of not knowing how to meet others' needs adequately. But someone who expresses emotions authentically while also demonstrating they're managing those emotions independently presents a different dynamic. They might mention feeling stressed about work, but they're already handling it and don't need the avoidant to do anything. They might share feeling disappointed about something, but they're processing it themselves. This combination, emotional honesty without emotional dependence, allows avoidants to experience intimacy without the pressure that usually accompanies it. They can witness authentic feelings without the anxiety of figuring out how to respond or the guilt of potentially responding inadequately. Over time, this creates safety around emotional expression that didn't exist before. The avoidant starts to see that emotions don't automatically create obligations, which challenges one of their core beliefs about closeness. Someone's sadness doesn't mean the avoidant failed them. Someone's anxiety doesn't mean the avoidant must fix it. This separation between feeling and responsibility allows the avoidant to gradually become more comfortable with emotional intimacy. The 10th trigger operates through leaving first, before they feel the need to withdraw. This might seem counterintuitive, but avoidants often feel most attracted during brief absences. When someone consistently ends interactions while things still feel good, leaving dinner slightly early, ending calls before the conversation drags, suggesting time apart before the avoidant feels crowded, it prevents the buildup of pressure that triggers their withdrawal. The avoidant never reaches the point where they need to escape, because the other person is already creating healthy space. This pattern reverses the usual dynamic where the avoidant feels responsible for managing distance. Instead, both people naturally create space as part of the relationship's rhythm. The avoidant doesn't have to be the bad guy who pulls away or disappoints by needing alone time. The other person treats space as normal and healthy rather than problematic. This eliminates the shame and guilt avoidants typically feel about their needs, which are among the most painful aspects of their attachment pattern. When someone makes space feel natural rather than like abandonment or rejection, the avoidant can finally relax into a connection without the constant anxiety of when they'll need to withdraw. These 10 psychological triggers work because they address the core fears that created avoidant attachment in the first place. Avoidants learned that expressing needs led to rejection, that depending on others felt dangerous, and that closeness threatened their autonomy. When someone demonstrates through consistent behavior that connection won't require them to sacrifice independence, won't punish them for needing space, and won't fall apart when they withdraw, it creates the conditions where their defensive walls can gradually lower. This isn't manipulation because it requires the other person to genuinely embody these qualities. Someone can't fake authentic self-sufficiency or genuine indifference about outcomes. These traits either exist or they don't. The deepest truth about attracting avoidance is that it requires becoming someone who doesn't actually need to attract them. The psychological profile that appeals to avoidant attachment is someone so complete in themselves that the avoidant's participation is optional rather than necessary. This creates a paradox where the people most capable of reaching avoidance are often the least motivated to do so, because their wholeness means they won't tolerate inadequate relationships indefinitely. They might be willing to move at an avoidance pace and respect their needs, but they won't wait endlessly for reciprocation that never comes. This paradox protects both people. Someone who develops these qualities naturally filters out avoidants who aren't capable of eventual reciprocity. If an avoidant can't gradually match investment, respect the other person's needs, and move toward greater intimacy over time, the self-sufficient person will eventually leave rather than diminishing themselves. But for avoidants who are capable of growth and healing, encountering someone who embodies these 10 qualities can catalyze genuine transformation. The safety created by this dynamic allows them to slowly challenge their defensive patterns without the pressure that usually makes change impossible. Understanding these triggers also reveals why common dating advice fails with avoidance. Pursuing harder, expressing feelings more intensely, or trying to prove worthiness through effort all backfire because they increase pressure rather than reducing it. The avoidant nervous system interprets intensity as threat, which strengthens rather than weakens defenses. But the behaviors that actually appeal to avoidance — space, independence, emotional self-regulation, boundary respect — feel counterintuitive to people with anxious attachment who are often attracted to avoidance. This creates relationships where both people are essentially asking for what triggers the other person's core wounds, which explains why anxious avoidant pairings so often become painful cycles. Breaking that cycle requires one person to fundamentally change their approach, and realistically, the anxious person must make that shift because avoidance won't pursue someone who's pursuing them. The anxious person must develop genuine self-sufficiency rather than performing it strategically. They must become actually indifferent about outcomes rather than using withdrawal as a tactic. This represents real personal growth that serves them regardless of whether the relationship with the avoidant works out. Someone who develops these qualities becomes more emotionally healthy and attracts more secure partners generally, whether avoidant or not. For avoidants watching this, recognizing these patterns offers different insights. If someone in your life embodies these qualities and you feel drawn to them, that attraction signals something important about your readiness for connection. Your nervous system is responding positively precisely because this person feels safe. That safety doesn't mean they'll wait forever, though. People who have this level of self-sufficiency and emotional health tend to have clear boundaries about what they'll accept in relationships. They won't chase or pressure, but they also won't tolerate indefinite distance or lack of progression. If you want connection with someone like this, you'll need to gradually challenge your avoidant patterns and move toward them at whatever pace feels possible. The work of changing attachment patterns happens slowly and requires addressing the original wounds that created the defensive structure. Avoidance developed their style for valid reasons. It protected them when expressing needs felt dangerous. That protection served them well during childhood or past relationships, where vulnerability led to pain. But in the present, with someone who won't punish their needs or threaten their autonomy, those defenses can gradually soften. This softening doesn't mean becoming someone different. It means discovering that connection and autonomy aren't mutually exclusive, that needing someone doesn't automatically lead to engulfment, and that vulnerability won't necessarily result in rejection. These psychological turn-ons create the conditions where that discovery becomes possible. When someone demonstrates through countless small actions that they won't pressure, won't depend, won't crowd, and won't punish withdrawal, the avoidant can begin testing whether closeness might feel different than it did before. This testing happens incrementally. Slightly more communication, marginally more vulnerability, gradually more investment. If the other person receives these tiny movements toward intimacy without turning them into pressure for more, the avoidance nervous system learns that maybe this time connection won't require giving up the self. That learning happens in the body through experience, not through intellectual understanding or conversation about attachment patterns. The transformation happens when both people can maintain themselves while also being available for connection. The formerly anxious person has developed such solid self-worth and life satisfaction that they no longer need the avoidance validation to feel okay. The avoidant has gradually discovered that this particular person feels safe enough to risk greater vulnerability. In that space between two whole people who want but don't need each other, genuine intimacy becomes possible. It's not the desperate clinging the avoidant always feared, nor is it the distant coldness the anxious person couldn't tolerate. It's something different. Connection between two people who each maintain their autonomy while also choosing to be together. That's ultimately what these 10 psychological turn-ons create. Not a trick to capture an avoidant, but a dynamic where both people can be fully themselves while also moving closer together. The avoidant doesn't have to sacrifice independence for connection. The other person doesn't have to sacrifice dignity for relationship. Both can have what they need, which makes the relationship sustainable long-term rather than a temporary pattern that eventually breaks under accumulated resentment or unmet needs. This is what healthy relationship with an avoidant actually looks like when it works. Two complete individuals who enhance rather than diminish each other. If you recognize your own patterns in this description, whether avoidant or anxious, remember that attachment styles are patterns, not permanent identities. They can shift with awareness, effort, and the right relational experiences. Understanding what genuinely appeals to avoidant nervous systems helps both sides of the dynamic make better choices. For those attracted to avoidance, it clarifies whether pursuing that connection serves your own growth or keeps you stuck in painful patterns. For avoidance, it illuminates what kind of person might feel safe enough to risk gradual opening. Share in the comments what patterns you've noticed in your own relationships with avoidant people. Or if you're avoidant, what qualities in partners have actually helped you feel safer rather than more defensive? If this breakdown helped you understand these dynamics better, hit the like button and subscribe for more content on attachment, relationship patterns, and emotional health. Thanks for watching.